I was just thinking that right now I could go for some orange or some sex.
Everybody Loves Raymond might be the only sitcom where a knock at the door doesn't mean company. It means your boundaries just got canceled. Before you even sit down, Marie's already in the kitchen. Frank's complaining like it's a competitive sport. And Ray's doing that classic move where he agrees with everyone separately and hopes the laws of physics will protect him. That's the secret sauce of this show. It isn't about big sitcom plots. It's about the kind of everyday family chaos that feels so real, you start wondering if the writers had hidden cameras in your relatives' houses. And the wild part is, they kind of did. A massive chunk of the series came straight from real-life experiences, which explains why the arguments feel less like jokes and more like Tuesday. So today, we're doing a full Weird Facts countdown, 15 to 1, covering everything from the title Ray Romano didn't even want, to the behind-the-scenes standoffs, to the finale choice that still makes fans argue like they're sitting at the Barone breakfast table. 15. Ray Romano hated the title and tried to change it. It's hard to imagine now, but Ray Romano wasn't exactly thrilled to star in a show with a title that sounds like a brag printed on a novelty mug. The problem wasn't ego. It was the opposite. Ray worried the name would turn him into an easy punchline if the show flopped. Like, not canceled after one season embarrassment. More like the headline writes itself embarrassment. So he pushed back. Hard. He pitched other title ideas, tried to get people above his pay grade involved, and basically did everything short of legally changing his name to not Raymond. What makes it funnier is that the title is perfect for the show's whole vibe. Ray is the guy everyone loves because he's harmless, until you realize he's been quietly causing half the chaos. And that's the irony. The title that made Ray nervous ended up becoming part of the show's identity, because the whole series is about how being the liked one in a family often means you're also the most enabled one. 14. The title came from Ray's real-life brother, as a sarcastic line. Here's the twist. The famous phrase didn't start as marketing. It started as a brother being irritated, which, honestly, is the most Everybody Loves Raymond origin story possible. As Ray's career picked up, one of his brothers reportedly cracked a line along the lines of, "Oh sure, everybody loves Raymond," dripping with that very specific sibling energy. Support, jealousy, annoyance, and affection, all blended into one sentence. And that's exactly why it worked. The show isn't saying Ray is adored because he's special. It's saying he's adored because he's the guy everyone projects onto. He's the nice one, the easy one, the one you can guilt into doing things. When you know that, the title becomes less of a compliment and more of a warning label. It sets up the entire dynamic. Ray is in the middle of the family, being tugged in every direction, and the people who love him the most are also the ones most willing to bulldoze his life. Which makes the next fact make perfect sense, because the show didn't just borrow the title from real life. It basically borrowed everything. 13. About 90% of the show was pulled from real family stories. This is the part that explains why the show feels less like sitcom writing and more like you're eavesdropping on Thanksgiving. Phil Rosenthal has said that around 90% of the storylines came from real-life experiences. His, Ray's, and the writer's room's collective trauma. But based on real life sounds cute until your real family sees it. Because now it's not just a funny plot where the mom is overbearing or the brother is jealous. It's your mom, your brother, and it's airing on CBS, in prime time, with a laugh track. Apparently, families sometimes reacted like you'd expect. Confusion, offense, and the classic, "Why would you tell people we do that?" Which is hilarious, because the answer is, because it's funny. The writers weren't mocking families. They were documenting the weird little power struggles families pretend they don't have. And once you commit to that kind of realism, you can't cast the show like a glossy sitcom fantasy. which leads directly into one of the most infamous behind-the-scenes battles. 12. CBS wanted a hotter Deborah, and Phil Rosenthal nearly walked over it. Deborah Barone works because she feels like an actual human being, smart, exhausted, funny, and this close to snapping in half like a dry spaghetti noodle. That's the magic Patricia Heaton brought. She didn't play sitcom wife. She played a woman trying to survive a family ecosystem built entirely to test her patience. But behind the scenes, Phil Rosenthal has said the network pushed for a different vibe. The note wasn't about comedy or chemistry. It was basically, can we make her hotter? And Rosenthal's response was essentially, that misses the point of the show. Deborah isn't a fantasy. She's the audience's avatar. He's even said he almost quit over it, because if Deborah becomes a perfect sitcom wife, the whole family dynamic collapses. The conflicts stop feeling real. The marriage stops feeling like two adults in a weird situation, and the show turns into something shiny and forgettable. Instead, they stuck with the version that worked, Deborah as the only person in the room who can see the madness clearly, while still being trapped inside it. 11. The show is basically Queen, but CBS nudged it to Long Island. Ray Romano is a Queens guy, and the whole blue-collar New York family vibe is baked into the DNA of the show. But the series ended up set on Long Island, and that wasn't just a random detail. It was a network decision. The creators initially leaned toward Queens because that's the authentic origin point. But CBS preferred Long Island, suburb energy with just enough city-adjacent edge. Translation: more people will relate to this, and we won't scare anyone who thinks Queens is just car alarms and parking tickets. It's funny, because the show still feels like Queens. The closeness, the neighbors, the way everyone is always in everyone's business, the attitude, the constant low-level arguments that never quite become war, but never quite disappear either. So you get this perfect hybrid. The geographic label says suburbs, but the emotional geography says old neighborhood. And that mismatch actually helps the comedy, because Ray is living this safe suburban life, yet still can't escape the family gravitational pull that keeps dragging everyone back into the same kitchen. 10. Robert Barone wasn't invented out of thin air. He was inspired by Ray's brother. Robert Barone is one of the great sitcom inventions. The tall, gloomy, socially awkward brother who somehow manages to be both intimidating and tragically needy at the same time. He's a cop, he's resentful, and he carries himself like a man who has been personally betrayed by Joy. And a lot of that sibling tension came from real life. Ray Romano has brothers, and the show used that dynamic as fuel, especially the idea of the overlooked sibling watching the funny one get all the attention. Robert's vibe is basically, I'm responsible, I'm useful, I'm doing everything right. So why does mom act like Raymond is the second coming? What makes it even better is that the show never turns Robert into a villain. He's not evil. He's just full of emotional splinters. And that's why he's so funny. You can practically hear the internal monologue. I'm happy for you. I'm also furious. I will now eat standing up. Once you realize how much family reality is baked in, you start spotting it everywhere, including in one casting detail that fans still love bringing up. 9. Amy is literally the creator's real-life wife. Amy isn't just Robert's love interest. She's the calm, gentle counterweight to the Barone chaos, a character who can smile politely while the family is emotionally setting the room on fire. And in one of the most sitcom meta-facts ever, Monica Horan, who played Amy, was, and is, married to Phil Rosenthal, the creator of the show. So yes, the guy running the series helped build the Barone universe, and then his actual wife walked into it as one of the only characters who feels like she's from a slightly more peaceful dimension. It's also a perfect fit for the show's tone. Nothing is glossy. Nothing is overly TV. The casting works because people feel real together. Amy feels like someone you'd actually meet, which makes Robert's relationship arcs even funnier, because he's always acting like love is an obstacle course designed by a cruel engineer. The best part is how quietly this fact sits in the background. Most viewers didn't even realize it during the original run, because the show never winks at it. It just keeps serving the story like Marie serving food, constantly, whether you asked for it or not. 8. One of the most famous episodes came from a real first-grade kid assignment. You know an episode is iconic when it turns the Barones into a psychological case study. The Angry Family is one of those. The kids bring home a story about a family that fights nonstop, and suddenly everyone's staring at each other like, wait, is this us? Here's what makes it even better. The premise didn't come from a random writer's brainstorm. It came from real life, specifically a childhood school assignment in the Rosenthal family. In other words, the show pulled a plot from the most dangerous source possible, something a kid once wrote down innocently, and adults later had to read. That's why the episode lands. It's not just sitcom misunderstanding. It's the horror of seeing your family dynamic described in simple, unfiltered language. Adults can rationalize anything. Kids just say, my family yells, and suddenly you're booking counseling. It also speaks to the show's genius. The Barones aren't cartoon characters. They're a recognizable type of family, and the comedy comes from how normal they think their weirdness is, until it's reflected back at them by someone who hasn't learned to pretend yet. 7. The Barone kids were played by real siblings, including twins. Sitcom kids are often a gamble. Too cute, too stiff, too line reading. But Everybody Loves Raymond lucked into a casting situation that made everything easier and more believable. The kids weren't just well cast. They were actual siblings. Madeline Sweeten played Allie, and real-life twin brothers Sawyer and Sullivan Sweeten shared the role of Jeffrey. That they look and act like real kids energy wasn't acting magic. It was just biology and familiarity. It also helped the show keep the kids in the story without turning it into a kids sitcom. The kids feel like background reality, always present, always hearing things they shouldn't, and occasionally wandering into the adult chaos like tiny witnesses to a crime scene. And knowing the kids were real siblings makes the family vibe even stronger, because the Barones' whole thing is that they're a unit, whether they like it or not. There's no clean separation between my life and your life. Everyone shares the same air, the same kitchen, the same emotional weather system. Which brings us to the moment the show became so successful, it started making national headlines for something other than jokes. 6. Ray Romano's paycheck became a whole news event. At a certain level of sitcom success, ratings stop being the headline, and money becomes the headline. And Everybody Loves Raymond hit that level. Ray Romano reportedly signed a deal that put him around $1.8 million per episode at one point. An amount so huge it almost sounds fake unless you remember how dominant network TV still was in that era. It wasn't just good money. It was, this is a cultural phenomenon money. And it creates a very specific kind of behind-the-scenes pressure, because once the lead becomes that valuable, everyone else knows exactly what the show is earning and exactly how much leverage they might have. It's like a family argument, but with contracts instead of casserole. The funniest part is how perfectly this mirrors the show's themes. On screen, Ray is the guy everyone revolves around, sometimes unfairly. Off screen, the business side starts doing the same thing. The show is built on Ray's voice and persona, so the economics start tilting around him too. And when that happens, you get a real-life episode that's even messier than anything they put on TV. 5. Brad Garrett's salary dispute actually stopped production. At some point, Everybody Loves Raymond briefly turned into Not Everybody Loves Raymond, because Brad Garrett, who played Robert, held out for more money, and it wasn't a quiet little negotiation. Production got disrupted. Headlines popped up. It became a story because the show was a massive hit, and Robert was not a replaceable ingredient. You can't do the Barone family without the brother, who looks like he's permanently disappointed in everyone's posture. Eventually, the dispute ended, and filming continued. But the moment is fascinating because it shows how much power the ensemble had earned. This wasn't a sitcom where one person could carry the whole thing while everyone else becomes wallpaper. The cast chemistry was the product. It also explains why Robert's character often feels like the show's secret weapon. Ray is the center, but Robert is the pressure valve. He's the guy who says what everyone's thinking in the most uncomfortably honest way possible. So, when the actor playing that role pushes back in real life, it feels weirdly on brand. Like the show itself had a Robert moment and refused to keep going until he felt respected. 4. The finale was intentionally small because they wanted it to feel like a normal episode. A lot of sitcom finales try to be an event. Surprise weddings, big goodbyes, tearful speeches, someone moves away forever. Everybody Loves Raymond went the other direction. The finale is basically the show saying, "You want closure? Here's your closure. This family will never change." The story centers on a health scare and a moment of emotional honesty. And then, almost immediately, everyone slides right back into the same rhythm. Which is the point. Real families don't get neat wrap-ups. They get breakfast, then another argument, then someone asks if you're staying for dinner. Phil Rosenthal has described the intention as making it feel like a typical episode, not a spectacle, and it's one reason the ending still gets debated. Some people love the honesty, others wanted fireworks. But if you zoom out, the quiet finale is actually the boldest option because it refuses to pretend this story ever had an ending. It also connects to the fact that they didn't just casually drift into the final season. They made deliberate choices about when and how to stop. 3. Season 9 was shorter on purpose. They only wanted the number of stories they could do well. By the time a sitcom hits its late seasons, it faces a fork in the road. Keep going because it's successful, or stop because you're protecting quality. Everybody Loves Raymond leaned hard into the second option. Rosenthal has talked about how they did a shortened 9th season because they only felt they had a certain number of good stories left. That's such a rare TV mindset, especially for a big network hit. Usually the machine wants more episodes, more seasons, more syndication value. But the creative core of the show cared about not stretching the premise until it snapped. And you can feel that in the late run. The show never turns into a parody of itself. The characters don't become cartoon versions. Marie doesn't suddenly become a supervillain. Frank doesn't become a meme factory. The writing keeps the family dynamics grounded enough that it still feels like real people being petty. That might be the greatest compliment you can give a long-running sitcom. It didn't collapse under its own success. And if you ever doubted how respected the show was in the industry, there's a number that basically shuts down the argument. 2. The show pulled 69 Emmy nominations and won 15. For a sitcom that's essentially a sports writer tries to nap while his family refuses, Everybody Loves Raymond had a seriously impressive awards run. We're talking 69 Emmy nominations and 15 wins, including a lot of acting recognition, which makes sense because the show is an ensemble masterclass. Those numbers matter because they highlight something casual viewers sometimes miss. This wasn't just a comfort sitcom. It was a precision machine. The timing, the micro expressions, the way a single look from Marie can collapse an entire conversation. It's all crafted. And the Emmys also validate something fans have always known. The characters are funny because they're specific. Frank is funny because he's not trying to be lovable. Marie is funny because she's loving and controlling at the same time. Robert is funny because he wants validation so badly it becomes physical. Deborah is funny because she's constantly negotiating sanity. This kind of comedy is hard. It's not punchlines. its behavior. Which makes the next fact even more charming, because the guy at the center of it all wasn't swaggering into TV stardom. He was quietly panicking. 1. Ray Romano felt like he deserved to be fired early on and got help to find his sitcom rhythm. Ray Romano is basically the king of self-deprecating comedy, so maybe this shouldn't be surprising. But he's openly said that early on he felt stiff, uncomfortable, and like he deserved to be fired. That's such a weirdly relatable detail for a show that became iconic. Because when you watch season 1, you can actually see him settling in. He's a stand-up guy, stepping into a multi-camera sitcom world with blocking, marks, timing, and live audience energy that's different from a club. It takes time to make it look effortless. The really cool part is that the show didn't hide that learning curve. It grew with him. Ray became more confident, the rhythms between the actors sharpened, and the family dynamic got tighter and funnier. And maybe that's why the cast and creators have been so protective about not doing a standard reboot. It's not just nostalgia. It's that the feel of the show was something they built together over years, and it's hard to imagine recreating that, especially with key members of the family gone. So conclusion. The best weird fact about Everybody Loves Raymond is that none of the weirdness is actually weird. That's why it worked. The show never tried to convince you these people were lovable angels. It just showed you a family doing what families do best, pushing buttons they personally installed. Behind the scenes, it was just as human as the stories on screen. Arguments about creative choices, nerves about the title, money drama, and that constant tug of war between keeping a hit going and keeping it good. And somehow, all of that pressure produced a show that still feels weirdly modern, because the core comedy isn't 90s sitcom jokes. It's the timeless truth that your family can love you to death, and then ask why you don't visit more. And the finale choice says it all. No giant goodbye, no huge transformation, just one more morning where everyone ends up at the table, like gravity still works the same way.